Well, hello and welcome to the After Sermon Podcast. My name is David Baxley. I'm one of the pastors here at Bethany. We're glad you're joining us. Along with myself, we also have the one who's usually here with us, Joe Roraff.
Yeah.
And welcoming back to the table, he hasn't been here in about a month, but Billy Heston.
Yo.
Billy's our youth pastor and was the one bringing our message this Sunday. We've been in that series, just a short series that we've been doing through the book of Psalms that we've called Through the Valley, Calling Out to God. And each week we've, as pastors, myself and our college director, Parker, and then Billy this last week, each taken a psalm that's really close to our hearts that we just feel like God was wanting to really speak to our church during this season specifically, and brought those to the table to just bring to our church before we kind of kick off into some new stuff during the summer. But it's been, at least for me and being a part of this, I have both really enjoyed the podcast, but really enjoyed the messages. It's been incredible to me just seeing how God really brought these together for just this time, not just for what's going on in our city and nation, but really for where I think God's taking us as a church right now.
Yeah, for sure. It's all just kind of fell in place. It's kind of crazy. Even more so, I was like, yeah, this passage looks like this will be really good for what I want to accomplish. And then the more I unraveled it, I was just blown away. I was like, this is exactly what we need to talk about.
Yeah, because it wasn't just a message out of Psalm 82, but it was really essentially a vision of who God is calling us to be as a church in response to what he says in Psalm 82. There was a real clear call to action there for us as a church.
Yeah, for sure.
Which we'll get into in just a minute. But let's go, and we're going to start with Psalm 82. Joe, you're going to be reading that one.
Sweet.
And actually, what version did you read on Sunday? Were you preaching
I read on Sunday? It'll be ESV.
ESV? Okay, all right, yeah, go
all right,
do ESV.
we'll do it.
I know sometimes you use different translations. Want to get the one you were coming out of.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Joe.
Psalm 82. God has taken his place in the divine council. In the midst of the gods, he holds judgment. How long will you judge unjustly and show partiality to the wicked? Give justice to the weak and the fatherless. Maintain the right of the afflicted and the destitute. Rescue the weak and the needy. Deliver them from the hand of the wicked. They have neither knowledge nor understanding. They walk about in darkness. All the foundations of the earth are shaken. I said, you are gods, sons of the Most High, all of you. Nevertheless, like men, you shall die and fall like any prince. Arise, O God, judge the earth, for you shall inherit all the nations.
So that text definitely has a lot of different different cans of worms to even potentially open in it. But why don't we just start kind of with the fundamental piece, Billy, that was your heart behind taking us to this passage, and we'll kind of go deeper in it in just a minute, but kind of share your heart. You hit this on Sunday, but maybe expound on it a little bit more. What you really feel like was so important about this passage that you really believe God wanted us to hear as a church, and share a little more of your heart for that calling that God's really challenging us with as well.
Yeah. So, we've talked a little bit about the Mercy Justice team that we're trying to establish here at the church. And if you recall, that's been quite some time. Back in January, I preached on it. We talked a little bit about it in February. And we just had some hurdles, but we didn't stop. We were just doing a lot of behind-the-scenes work on it. Yeah. COVID hit and all that different stuff. It's been something that's been on our heart. We've been talking about leadership for a long time. And I remember David said, hey, we're going to do this mini-series on Psalms, crying out. And as soon as I heard him say crying out, I was like, dude, this is the time for us to really unravel a little bit more with the Mercy Justice. And David was like, yeah, I agree. This could be really powerful. And there was a couple different Psalms. We were playing around with that. But the more I read 82, a couple verses in that, because I didn't get hard studying it. I saw the can of worms that they talked about, but I was like, we'll figure that as we go. But verses 2 through 4 were those really, really amazing verses. I was like, that is it. That's what I want God's people to hear. And it's, how long will you judge unjustly and show partiality to the wicked? Give justice to the weak and the fatherless. Maintain the right of the afflicted and the destitute. Rescue the weak and the needy. Deliver them from the hands of the wicked. All this was really encompassed what I felt God wanted us to share with God's people on his heart for the marginalized and the vulnerable people, of foster care and adoption. So the Mercy Justice has that whole encompassing the marginalized and the vulnerable, but right now in the season, we've really been trying to gear up in helping foster care and adoption. When I talked about this originally, we talked about mishpat, which also has a lot to do with justice. And he talks about different types of justice, believe it or not, in this passage. Dang it, I didn't think about pulling up the Greek word that they use here, but it's almost as equal as the word mishpat that's used in Micah 6:8. So why don't you go ahead and read that for us?
You have that, Joe?
Yeah,
Joe?
I have it right
Okay,
here.
good. You go for it.
Micah 6:8. He has told you, O man, what is good, and what does the Lord require of you, but to do justice and to love kindness and to walk humbly with your God.
And this is the idea where we get the mercy and justice. The NIV uses to act justly and love mercy there. And this is, again, the call to God. And the mishpat, it's more of like a word of imagery than it is a word that we associate normally with justice in our worldview and our Western perspective. We think of law and order.
Right, yeah.
But mishpat has this idea, and it's kind of become our mantra in Mercy Justice as we've talked about it as a team and developed. It's this hand up, not a hand out, right? And it's a beautiful image of the gospel, God coming down to us to pull us back up to Him. And what a beautiful image that is. And He's calling us to do the same. So,
Well, I think one thing that stands out to me in this idea of justice that we see echoed from God's heart is that it starts with this premise of, and we've talked about this before, but who we are is created in the image of God.
yeah.
There's a justice in the heart of God that is rooted in how He sees creation, how He sees humanity. And I think sometimes and you alluded to this, we look at this idea of justice through the lens of, especially in our culture, American culture, through the lens of whatever the Constitution says. That must be justice. So when God says justice, we just instantly go to everything we know about justice. And that's natural. It's a very logical thing for us to do. But there's a problem with that because God's justice is not always our justice. In fact, oftentimes, God has a different picture of how that should play out.
Yeah, for sure. I think, we think of the image of justice holding scales with the bandana or whatever it is, being blindfolded. And that's a great thing, and I think that's something we should practice, that it's fair, it's balanced, and different things like that. But there's nothing of the sort with God. His is perfect, right? And He sees everything. And so with that, his perspective is always going to be clear and right. And so that's something we should continue to be looking and asking God for His eyes. And more specifically in this series, when we talk about the Psalms and the valley that we walk through, and having ears like God for those who cry out for justice and mercy, right? That they've been given this unfair treatment maybe by the wicked. And God doesn't want that to happen. He wants us to rise up and be the hands and feet of His body, like we've been called to do.
Yeah, amen.
Not just individually, but as a church, as a body of believers.
I think that was on Sunday when you mentioned this in the message. I think one of the most powerful images that you had, I remember us talking about this during the week, and you saw a big smile on my face when we spent the first 2 weeks of calling out to God, really talking about our calling out to God, how we call out to Him in light of what we see maybe unjustly being done to us or our own struggles, and there's that place for us to do that. But you took us to a place that we don't naturally go to, especially at a time like this where we might be focused on ourselves and our own struggles and our own weariness. You said, but God is reminding us to have, like you just said, ears that He hears those crying out in need, in much more vulnerable, desperate situations than we find ourselves in.
Yeah.
I think that echoes itself, and you and I originally talked about the Psalm as well, Psalm 68. It's another mirror, because this is a theme that's echoed throughout the Bible that we don't pick up on as easily. Psalm 68, verse 5, God's describing Himself. He's a father of the fatherless and a protector of the widows, God in His holy habitation. And that echo again, Deuteronomy. See right here, Deuteronomy 10:18 says, He ensures the orphans and widows receive justice. He shows the love for the foreigners living among you and gives them food and clothing. Psalms 10:14, but you, God, see the troubled of the afflicted and consider their grief, and you take that in hand. The victims commit themselves to you. You are the helper of the fatherless. God's justice is for those that have. Like you said, God has the power. He reaches His hand out to us and offers us a path to be restored. God's calling on us is to reach out for those, and not just spiritually, but to physically call them out of the injustice and the affliction and the suffering that they are going through, even if it has nothing to do with our fault, to just reach out for them because they are created in the image of God.
Yeah, I mean, this narrative goes throughout a large part of the Bible, and you see that God calling Israel to be that, like, look for the sojourner and people who are oppressed and taking them in and showing hospitality to different people. That's throughout it. And then you go into the New Testament and you see Jesus is called to be light, right? To be the light of the world. And so what does that do? The people who are in darkness, the people in the valleys can find a way back to God. What is it, 1 Corinthians 5:17, where that we've been called to be ambassadors of Jesus Christ, right? The old is gone, the new is here. We are, a lot of times, we are not the path, right? Jesus Christ is the path, but we're on the path. And so when people are crying out to God, what are we to say? Hey, here it is. Here's the answer. It's not just fixing all your problems around you. It's getting you to the one who can. And so I know a lot of people might confuse this and say, oh, you're saying that we need to be God to people. It's like, no, not at all. We're giving the perspective that we have to other people to give them the hope that we have in Jesus Christ.
But at the same time, I think, and you mentioned, when you first kind of began this topic back in November, you preached out of James.
Yeah.
On this, and
1:27.
Yeah, and I think that reminds it too. James 1:27 says, "Religion that is pure and undefiled before God, the Father, is this: visit the orphans and widows in their affliction, and to keep oneself unstained from the world." And so there's this morality piece of who we are and our behavior. And the gospel is centric to this, but to truly say we have the gospel living us means true faith in God that is undefiled, that's not mixed with our own, and I look at undefiled as not mixed with our own worldviews, corrupting our view of almost creating this, like, this is my version of Christianity, and this is why I know I'm a good Christian. But James reminded us, that true faith, a big piece of that is being the hands and feet of God into these most vulnerable situations, which is what you're mentioning, that you really, really believe God's calling us to take a stronger action on as a church, to take care of those that are fatherless, the orphans, the widows, the most vulnerable, the afflicted, those that don't have the means and power and blessings available that we have. And if we truly have the faith we claim to have, we're supposed to be reaching our hand out there to reach them up and help pull them up out of that.
Yeah. There's a lot in that whole passage. That's why I was able to preach the whole message on James 1:27 and unpack that a little bit last time. It's one of those ones that I think we confuse a lot of times, because I think in our, maybe even our asymmetrical mind, we like list and we like, hey, order. We like to just be told what to do, no confusion behind it. And so what happens is a sense of almost legalism. Maybe that's not full blown out legalism, but hey, I could do X, Y, and Z and get the answer or get to the solution of it. And something that I think a lot of people have to be careful for is, and what I was amazed, shocked at studying through that, is James 1:27 is not saying, hey, you take care of orphans and widows and boom, you've done pure religion. He's saying, no, undefiled religion, in the sense of from the heart, from who we are in Christ, pouring out of that is to help these representatives of people. And Psalms is doing the same thing, and our passage in 82 is as well, that it's not just these people groups. It's people who are representative of that. In our culture today, we could have very well easily picked up the drug crisis, right? Where these people are stuck in darkness, and there's a lot of spiritual warfare around them. But we felt as a church we were specifically equipped to help those in need of a family, because one of our missions is to pursue and equip families to passionately follow Jesus Christ. Yeah,
that's such a beautiful picture. And this is the reminder, when the Bible talks about orphans, when we look at foster kids in the United States of America, and this is something you mentioned, that is those are the orphans. In our country. We don't have the traditional orphanage like what we're used to thinking, and that we see in other parts of the world still. We have the system that takes care of these kids, either that are, even they have a parent that's alive, that parent is so absent, so broken, so far away that they might as well be without parents. And they truly are the orphans of of our nation, and that's who God has called us to reach out to.
Yeah. Let me just say this real quick, because you're bringing up a good point that I want to be clear with the church and those who are listening to this podcast. I don't claim to be any expert on any of these things. In fact, I've been blown away at how ignorant I have been of these things in the past. I definitely feel like the person God has called and being unqualified in that sense, but I still feel called, and I feel a movement to want to do something about that, and to use my giftings maybe towards outreach and evangelism, and service evangelism is one of the giftings I feel like God's given me. I'm not an expert by any means in that either, but that's the thing. And I hope that's an encouragement to other people.
That's good.
You don't have to have it all figured out. All you have to know is God wants you to do something, and start moving your feet and your hands, right? Learn as you go too. There's nothing wrong with that. I think of the guy in the parable, right, of talents, who buried his gifts, because it's almost like he was striving for something that he misunderstood God about. And God wants us to give our best now and then, and keep working towards excellence as well as we go. But the need is urgent. The need is crazy right now. You'll hear more of me on this on Sunday. I don't know how much I'll be able to unpack it. Time is limited. But there's a crisis coming in the fall that they're saying is unprecedented. It's going to be like nothing we've ever seen
for
in
foster kids
care.
specifically.
Yeah, foster care. And we know that our country, and there's a lot of unknowns, but here's what I would say that I think paints the picture really well. In the fall, it always spikes with foster care. That's something I've learned through this. It always does, a lot, like up to 30 to 40% every year. And it's because teachers are mandatory reporters, and they're able to report. The other side of that's scary, is the reason it's really bad in early fall is because these children have been trapped with abusers. That's a reality that we just need to be real with.
Yeah.
And with COVID happening, more stress, more pressure, more depression, rampant, people who are abusing children are probably doing it more. That's a true reality. So I just want to encourage us to be thinking ahead, and I really think this, because this isn't just a Bethany thing. First Free, other churches in our community, the globe has for some reason spiked in people reaching out for foster care, and I think it's because of things like this. God perceives it. God stirs.
That's right.
Hopefully God's people move.
I think that's an important thing to identify. We are moving, I really believe, in line with the heart of God. This isn't just another idea or another ministry. This is something that God tells us is close to his heart, that is of great importance to him. And just to affirm what Billy's saying, and Billy and I talked about this, we were mentioning this with our overseers, and as we were talking about this, I think it was about 5 years ago or so, before Billy got here, I remember coming and just sharing with the pastors. I just really feel like this is something that God has called us to somehow be a church that is ministering and reaching out to the foster care community. Yeah. And I said, I don't know. And I remember saying, I don't know what that specifically looks like. And I threw some ideas out there. And I even recognized that I don't know if that's God's calling me to lead that or anything like that. But it became this thing that was out there. We talked about it, but didn't really know what to do with it. Other things came up. Norv shared his heart in that later as well. But then all of a sudden, all the pieces have coming together this fall. God brought Billy into our team as a part of this, and I think God's been working in this for a long time, and now is where He's truly birthing it.
Yeah.
And that's what makes this such an exciting time for me as well.
I agree. But I want to say this too. I am shocked at the spiritual warfare that revolves around this. And our passage that we're going to be going over on Sunday does an incredible job at showing this. I mean, think about when Psalms was written, and it's probably alluding to something even before the psalmist that he's looking back on was happening. So I'd love to get into that.
Yeah, that's good.
We're not going to get into it too much Sunday.
Dive deeper into this. It's so close to the heart of God, and what does the enemy want to do with what's close to the heart of God? He is going to resist and fight against that. And now we come to this more difficult part of the packet. You want to focus on that, kind of read those verses?
Yeah, starting off, it's really interesting. You hear this, it kind of rubs, I think, our Western mindset in a way, because anytime we see lowercase g, we automatically think these are false gods, things that people think don't exist and stuff. And you see that God has taken his place in the divine council. We'll get into that in a second. In the midst of gods, he holds judgment. And so it automatically asks this question, okay, who are these gods that he's sitting in front of? And there's a lot of different theories about this. Some people think that it's talking about men that have high place in judges, actual judges that existed during that time who were just corrupt. Is that impossible? No, it's not impossible. I think that could be an interpretation. I tend to not think so. Right. Because what the verbiage we have here is the same verbiage we have in Job, where Job was, you see Satan in the council of God, and it's like God is talking back and forth with Satan. Have you thought about my servant Job to go and test this tempter, right? Mm-hmm. It's the same image. So then we're brought up to the question of, well, who are these lowercase g's? And this is an interesting word that I think, and it's the problem with language, right? When language changes, the meaning sometimes is hard to find. And that lowercase g is the Hebrew word Elohim. But if you look at God, uppercase G, in the exact same text, you would find the word Elohim. So God himself is called Elohim, and lowercase g is called Elohim too. So let's unpack that, guys. What have we discovered in that?
Yeah, you want to add to this?
Sure.
Yeah, go ahead, Joe. You ever added much yet?
Yeah, from the way I understand it is that word Elohim, there's a couple ways to see it where we use the word like sheep. There's one sheep, and then there's sheep. There's multiple sheep. You can say a sheep or the sheep, and you know whether you're talking about multiple sheep or just one sheep. In the same way in the Hebrew here, it's talking about gods. I don't remember how exactly it is, but they would have understood that it's multiple gods and it's not the God, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and to understand, I think, too, is important, right? So Elohim isn't who they were, it's what they were.
Yeah.
Right? So it was spiritual beings, that these are spiritual beings that he's referring to. God himself was a spiritual being. And so that's why he's considered Elohim. But he's on a whole different level of Elohim. And it very clearly, every time it's mentioned, even the word Yahweh, right, which you won't find in the Bible, but that's our interpretation of the word they used for God, which was a holy name they couldn't even use.
Yeah.
Right.
But Elohim in the reference of Yahweh is over 2,000 times in the Bible. Think about that. That's crazy.
It's a lot.
It's used for his heavenly counsel. It's also gods of the four nations in 1 King 11:43. It's used of demons in Deuteronomy 32:17. The disembodied human dead in 2 Samuel 28:13. And it's even used for angels in 35:7. So I think we would see here clearly that these are spiritual beings.
Yeah, it's not, like, no one would read that in the Hebrew and be able to say that's human beings you're talking about. It's definitely talking about spiritual gods.
Well, what's interesting, so the disembodied dead, even in human form, right? When you die, what do you become?
A spirit. Yeah.
Your spirit, right? and so then what are you? You're Elohim.
You're a
spiritual being.
Spiritual being, not a
So I think we kind of put a little bit too much in this idea of gods, because when we hear gods, we think of this divine nature, and there is even some divine nature to this one, because there's a council here, divine council, that we see, but it's not something that's flesh and blood. That's something that we could be
agreed
about.
Well, this is, like you said, this is a hard concept. We don't talk about the spiritual world that much, and we really need to talk about that more, understand that more. There's this, I think, accurate picture of what this could be alluding to we see in Daniel chapter 10. And in Daniel chapter 10, we come across this story. Daniel is praying and he's fasting and he's seeking God for this answer. And he prays and fasts for 21 days. And it says on the 21st day, this angel of the Lord came to him and came to give this answer. But the angel, as he's describing the journey the angel took to get there, he makes this statement which just seems to almost come out of nowhere. But for the angel, and even I think for Daniel, it was like, well, you understand this concept, I'm telling you. And for us, it may be more difficult. But he says this, I've come to give you these words, but the prince of the kingdom of Persia withstood me 21 days. But Michael, one of the chief princes, came out to help me, and I was left there with the king of Persia, and came to make you understand what's about to happen and give you this message. And so what we do is, this idea in Daniel chapter 10, there is a demonic power, a demonic prince. So, which is such a powerful word
Prince
because
of Persia, I think is what.
Yeah, Prince of Persia. That's right.
Not the video game.
No. So this demonic being that has a place of authority, it's given a neat title of prince, a ruler over Persia, over this area where Daniel is. The spiritual realm encountered a spiritual being that had a place of authority over this spiritual area.
Yeah, demonic.
Demonic, yes. And so the holy angel needed a warrior, Michael, to come and fight the demonic spiritual being in the spiritual realm so that the angel could come and give Daniel physically the word that he needed to hear. This, again, we don't paint this picture very much, but yet there's this idea. We see this. You've mentioned this other place in Scripture. We couldn't go through all those today, but truly there's this idea in Scripture that paints this picture of these two dominions over in the spiritual realm. You'd mentioned that earlier.
Yep.
There's the dominion of God's dominion, his authority, and the heavenly angels, but there's the dominion that also rebelled against him.
And Satan's
dominion, and they are constantly at war. At the same time God was moving in Persia through Daniel and was speaking and accomplishing things, there was a demonic prince that had spiritual power and authority. Now God held the ultimate spiritual power authority, but had spiritual power and authority that they were warring in the middle of.
Yeah.
I think that reflects kind of what David is alluding to and speaking to in Psalms 82.
Yeah, so, but in all that, I mean, that's a can of worms that I will not be able to even touch, really, on Sunday. So it's good we're talking about it now. But here's the whole point to it, right? In 82, he's pointing to these people, I mean, not these people, but these spiritual beings that have it out for these people who are fatherless, who are destitute, who are needy. And
they have a goal to create injustice. To counter God's justice.
Yeah.
Yeah, and here's the thing, though, because as I was studying this, and I thought, why? Just to be wicked? Just to be evil? I mean, that could be the case, but here's my heart when I read this, and I really think this is what God's after, is these people who are on the cusp of spiritual revelation, if they came to Jesus Christ, if they had this, and they have the spirit of orphan, right? And if they have this this truly coming to know who God is and know the Father, coming from that great of darkness, that deep of a valley into the light of Jesus Christ, man, that's something to reckon with. They don't want these people, if out of all the people they could focus on and cause to be lesser and lesser and be more oppressed, it's these people because, and Jesus speaks of this, right? The things that we've been forgiven of they love greatly, right? It's the same mindset, the same principle here. And when we've seen how God has pulled us out of great darkness, we want other people to see the light too. And it's going to be apparent to other people. So that's why I think that there is. And I'm going to tell you, as I've been trying to develop this team, the roadblocks, the hurdles. I've been in spiritual warfare before as being a pastor, and I'm like, wow, that was spiritual warfare. There's never been more evident in my life that there's spiritual warfare revolving around this.
Yeah, and I like what David said. They want the opposite of justice, and that, like, it's so true. Like, of course, when you read the Bible and you go through it and you look at Leviticus, and the tithe was used for the fatherless and the widow and the Levites and things like that, you look at it and you go, man, this is God's actual heart for it, and it's so contrary to what we want, as opposed, like, in the business world, it's dog eat dog. If you don't punch somebody down, they'll punch you down. If you don't get something for yourself, they'll get it.
And Joe says this as a small business owner in our community.
That's what I do. But God's heart is to say, hey, it's not dog eat dog. It's look out for the most vulnerable, for those who can't look out for themselves because of the structure of society. God wants us to do those things. So obviously, when we start doing those things that are contrary to our flesh, the enemy hates that. And of course, course we're going to get into spiritual warfare. And of course we need to be like David or Daniel in Daniel 10, where we fast and pray. And it's not, Daniel didn't go to the king and say, "King, here's what I want, here's what I see." He went to God to pray and to fast and to hear from him. And what happened? God interceded in a spiritual way.
Amen. That's really powerful.
As we talk about a lot of this, Joe, you're reminding me of a tension I think we can wrestle with, is that when we get into a topic about it, and I can resonate with this, we look at broken and hurting people, and we can feel, I don't know what to do for that person. And I'm not sure how to meet that need, and that's awkward, and can feel uncomfortable to walk into the people. So sometimes what we tend to do, Joe, and you allude to this, is we tend to try to fix this big scale thing, right? We're just we're gonna write to my congressman, and that's how I'm going to act justly for God. And
we're going to march.
And I'm going to protest, and that's how I'm going to act justly. And I'm not fighting those things. That's not what I'm saying at all in that.
Right.
But that I think what he's reminding us here is that we hand to hand is who God's called us to be as a church, to find, and this is what you're helping lead us through, Billy, is find those right here in our own neighborhood. Not only do we love the Lord our God with all our heart, soul, mind, and strength, but you're reminding us what it really looks like to love our neighbor, the marginalized, the weaker, the one that's struggling, the one that needs help, that doesn't have someone looking out for them, to love them as we love ourselves. Not in some big macro scale, but micro, and just come in and meet that need as we see it right here in our own neighborhood, next door to our own church. I think that reflects the heart of this
and that's what being the church is. Like Jesus said, they'll know you by your love for one another. And I think we just need to grab a hold of this kingdom, God's kingdom type of thing, where we're going hard after God's kingdom. And it's in direct opposition to what the world wants or what our flesh wants. But I think when you go against your flesh, that's probably the best thing you can do for the kingdom of God.
Yeah, it's going to be hard.
It's super hard.
We're going to have resistance, even from the people we help. You got to know that, right? I've helped foster care children. I've had a lot of them in student ministry. Some of them are incredible sweethearts. Some of them have gone through the ringer, and they're hard to love, right? And that's expected. And we have to expect that, and we have to say, you know what, but still grace above grace, and because that's what God does with us. And when we do that as a body, it's even more powerful. And that's where I want our church to see this. Yes, families are going to they're going to take in foster children, but not only are they a part of that family, our hope is to bring them into the family of God and be a part of our body as believers.
That's a good word. Yeah.
And us to lift each other up. So who knows where God's going to take us in this? I do know this, that there's things that anyone can do, from write a letter to buying maybe a jacket for someone, to praying, to fasting. There's something all we could do. Maybe be a mentor, advocate. The list goes on and on. The need is huge. So what the question isn't should you do, it's what can you do? And that's where I think that we need to start the conversation.
Yeah, and that's, as you mentioned Sunday, and we want our church to hear this as well. This is not just another conversation, another sermon on a topic that disappears tomorrow. We are behind the scenes. There is so much movement going on right now, and we're looking forward to, in the near future, as we're still watching how things unfold around us, because we want to do this in a way that we can really do it as a church, right? We want to be ready to take action and reach our hands out, both, and our community has to be ready for that too. And we're still in some chaos right now, so we can't do that quite yet. But we are going to be moving on this. This is not a pie in the sky idea, and I think that's what you're saying. I think the call to people, like you mentioned, even for our grow groups, to be praying and saying, God, all right, we're hearing from our church, we're hearing from our leaders. This is something God is going to call us to. This is our mission. God has called us to pursue it, like you said, and equip families. God has called us to run after and build a family here at Bethany made up of all of us as individuals that empower God's family design to raise up generation after generation that is passionately following Christ. And there are those out there that are needed, that don't even have the ability to have a family. And so we reach out to them to begin to even give them a family so they can respond to God's call to be passionate followers of Christ. And that's such an important calling for us.
What would you guys say to people who are probably listening to this and go, I don't have a heart for like foster care kids, or I don't have a heart to adopt somebody? What would you say to somebody like that who's maybe like, I don't feel called to do something like that?
Yeah, so my thing would say, you know, and this is a question even me and my wife are asking, right? We have 3 little ones, and we feel overloaded with the kids we have and being able to raise them well. Do we want to add to that, you know, stress in our ability? Do we have the capability? And those are good questions. I think everybody, don't walk into this ignorant. You should be sober-minded in that. But again, it goes back to who we are as a church. There's something that we can all do together in bringing in our family. You don't look around and you say, man, I can't stand my brother. Why in the world did I mean, we might ask that question. Some of us.
Apparently Billy does. We're going to just move past this one right now. Keep going, Billy.
Next.
Keep going.
But no, we really do. We look at them, but we shouldn't. We should say, you know, God has given me this brother, this sister, this mom, this dad. And that's the same thing when it comes to our church family is, you know, it's not your responsibility to change who's around you. It's your responsibility to love them where they're at. So as those people come in and people do have the capability or the heart to take in foster kids, how do you partner with them? How do you come alongside them and say, hey, how can I pray for you? What are your needs? Everybody has different giftings, and that's what makes up the body. Some people do have the financial means to help, and others don't. But it doesn't mean that you don't have the capability. In fact, it may be better for you, in a sense, to be involved in a different way, to just love on that person, be a mentor, like I said. Many of them will be in children's ministry and youth ministry because these are children we're talking about. What does it look like to do that? Some of you might have the education that helps early child development and know the processes and the ways to help kids like that. There's something we can all do, and I really mean that.
That's cool.
But here's I would build from that too, and that's where Billy's going. We're reminded of this in 1 Corinthians chapter 12. As Paul looks at the body, he's saying, well, you all have a variety of gifts. God is distributing gifts to the body to accomplish his purpose.
Right.
And so as we look as a church, saying this is a piece of who God has called us to be, and a piece, right? So we have a big mission as a church, and we have, but here it's also saying this is a big piece of that. And so to look at yourself and not say, where is my heart drawn of what I want to do necessarily? That's not a bad question to ask, but say, if God is drawing my church, who he's called me to this, what is it he's gifted me? What part of the body? Am I the hand, the arm, the eye, the ear, the toe, the foot, the knee, whatever it might be? What part am I as a part of this body that will help breathe life and help accomplish the mission that God's calling us to? Not just this, but other areas. And that's an important thing. We want to always be thinking about it. To turn it away from what I want and turn it back to who God's made me for the sake of his mission.
That's good.
And the mission that he's called us to as a church. And church, as we're closing right here, one of the things I just want to encourage you with, in this topic, I think there are 2 awkward things we talked about. One, just the reality of people suffering, those that are victims, as Psalm said, as those that are struggling, that are being treated unjustly. There's an awkwardness of we just don't always know what to do with that. And so what do we do if we don't know what to do with something? We tend to look somewhere else where we feel like we at least can understand it, to grasp it. I want to encourage you, bring your head, excuse me, turn your head back and see that God is, as God is doing this, he wants us to see things differently, see things through his eyes, and have ears that hear what he hears as people crying out. And so that's the first thing I want to encourage you with. And the other side is this weird spiritual warfare tense thing that was here. And to remind us, as we've talked about a couple of times this past year as a body, the reality of this spiritual warfare, the spiritual world that we're in, that is the world we're in. We are not just in a physical world. We are in the middle of a spiritual world. We are physical beings with a spirit. And Daniel understood this. We want to come at it with this idea of, as Psalms 82 paints this picture, it paints it for us so that we'll have eyes to see the physical and the spiritual world. Ask God to give you eyes to see the physical and spiritual world happening around you, and to be able to even better see his eyes of what he sees needed for us to do to respond to justice, to love justice, to love mercy, but ultimately all of us to walk humbly with our God. This is what he calls us to. So, Billy, thanks for this. This has been a great time. I love the message, and I'm looking forward to seeing where else God takes us. And then, church, next week, we're actually going to begin a new series that's going to take us through the summer. We're going to dive into the book of Philippians, and I'm really excited about that. We'll be getting to the book of Philippians and kicking that off next week in our podcast as well. So thank you for joining us. God bless, and have a great week.
See you, church.